Is it?
Even
Okay,
if
cool.
you like choose a different structure, it will record it in gallery view.
So if I gotta watch if I'm picking my nose or something like that, because everybody can see me all the time. I'm not in the small window, just on my, got it. Okay.
We can still see you in the small window too.
Yeah, but it's not as noticeable. Not as noticeable.
All
Cheers,
right,
my friend.
cheers.
Here's to multipliers.
There you go. All right, so if you're joining us now, we are reviewing the book Multipliers, How the Best Leaders Make Everyone Smarter by Liz Wiseman. And it's just Jeff and I today.
Yep.
So if you're listening to this, come join us for the next one.
Yes. To be determined.
To be determined.
To be determined.
Yeah. So Jeff, what did you think? I know you're like me. I think I still have like an hour and a half left on this book. But there were a lot of stories in this book. So the concepts, I think, are pretty straightforward.
Well, and I liked particularly, and I won't start here, I'll just mention it, that I liked the chapter, I believe it's chapter 7, on the accidental diminisher. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, as they say, and there are a lot of ways that
my mama.
Otherwise well-intended managers can end up really squashing their teams. And it's by more than just micromanaging. You know, when you micromanage something, when you want to take a project off someone's plate, you know, you feel like you're doing them a favor. Wait, I'm doing the work and you don't have to. No, people grow by being challenged.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with that, really, I mean, the concept starts off pretty early with, you know, the diminisher versus the multiplier. And what is a diminisher? A diminisher is someone who doesn't get as much out of their team as they could. You know, there were concepts discussed like discretionary effort, and you know, the idea that you know, when someone is fully engaged, and the Gallup organization would call this engagement, you know, they're working hard, they're exhausted, but they're invigorated. Whereas that's someone who works for a multiplier, whereas someone who works for a diminisher is not giving it their all and is just absolutely decimated their energy levels. They don't have the capacity to do any more, even though they're not doing that much. That, to me, ooh, this just hit me, and I'm going to take this in a side route. That, to me, demonstrates or illustrates a lot of the disconnect between managers and people in management who are your and my age, Christy, and these so-called issues with millennials who just don't want to do anything and aren't working very hard and then are complaining about it. It's like, maybe there's something being missed there. And I think this book could be onto that concept.
No question. And I will tell you that I believe, and I don't think this is a big stretch, that I have been an accidental diminisher in my past as a leader. And I say that with full humility and confidence as well, because the intent was always to, I've always been a servant leader.
Sure.
But understanding what actually serves others, that definition has changed for me over time.
Yeah. And perspective will do that for you.
What's that?
Perspective will do that for you.
Oh, isn't it a wonderful thing?
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, it just really, it was very interesting for me. I won't say it was a surprise,
right,
to kind of recognize that some of the techniques and things that I might have done earlier on in my career had a diminishing effect. But sometimes, you know, the work gets busy. And so you're running and you're trying to help and it takes a really incredible leader to take a step back and do some of the things that she talks about in this book, but they're so critical. And they're long-term investments. I think about raising kids, right? So I remember those times with the girls when, you know, they were just on every last nerve, and all you want is just go do what I told you to do when I told you to do it.
Yeah.
And be done with this. And so there are those moments that you recognize where you aren't truly investing in other people because you're trying to get to some level of outcome. And I think our corporate structure actually creates this oftentimes for us too. And I mean, it's hard to be a leader in a lot of organizations today because you are sandwiched in between a group of or individuals that are struggling to be heard and to feel valued, and a group of individuals who are trying to meet a certain outcome. And those two, trying to balance out those two groups of people is a challenge. There's a reason why so many people are stressed at the mid and upper levels of management.
Well, the outcomes that are used to measure performance rarely, if ever, include how many leaders have you produced. In sales organizations, you're judged by how much you sold. And if you report to someone, then they are judged by how much their direct reports sold, and so on and so forth up the ladder until you get to the VP of sales or the chief sales officer or the executive vice president or the CEO, or someone's ultimately accountable. What's interesting is when you look at NFL coaches, particularly NBA coaches, not quite as much. When you look at their coaching trees, so to speak, when Bill Belichick is judged by the performance of his former assistants that go out into the world and flourish as head coaches, Bill Belichick's assistants have not fared as well so far to date as Bill Parcells, who Bill Belichick came from, right? But everybody talks about the Parcells coaching tree and people who have come from him. And his legacy as a coach, even though he only won, I think he won 2 Super Bowls. I think he only won 1 Super Bowl. But he gets judged as a coach on a far higher level because of the leaders he has produced, right? It's not just what you get on the field. And that's rare. You don't see that in business, especially in Wall Street corporate, publicly traded, not just Wall Street, but publicly traded companies. It's all about earnings per share. It's about return on investment for the investor. It's not, hey, look, these people, look at the people who started PayPal, right? Peter Thiel and Elon Musk and some of those others. And you look at where those visionaries have gone after they sold to eBay. You look at where they've gone.
Yeah, I look at companies like Salesforce.
Yes, Salesforce
that has spun off a ton of other organizations. I look at even looking in my past, and I was trying to think back. I'm like, okay, so where were the multiplier leaders and the diminisher leaders in my experience? And I've had both. I've had, it's what's interesting for me is the people that I liked the most were not always the best multipliers.
Right.
Because that really wasn't what it was about. There were those people that wanted you, that made you want to do more. They stretched you in a way that was still supportive.
You get fortunate if you have those people in your organization, and you're fortunate to recognize them, and they are fortunate to be recognized, particularly by people higher up than them, because that is not a measurable. I mean, I'm sure we have the analytics and the analysis to be able to do so now, but it's not something that they're measured on. You're measured on performance. In sales, it's top line revenue. Okay. In management, you may have some bottom line profitability that you have to focus on there. Depends on the organization, but it's rare that you see people who will go about doing it in a multiplier way. It's those people who feel that's the best way to go about doing it. They do it and they're rewarded for it because it clearly works. But that's not something you have to do. And it actually is the long way around. It's not the shortcut. So now you got someone who's working harder to do it the right way in order to accomplish the same result. And, when the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, and all you're judged on is whether or not is how far is the distance between those 2 points. It's actually, in some cultures and some organizations, it's looked down upon to go about that way of leadership. And no one will argue with the material presented in this book, but very few will go about actually purposefully or purposely integrating that kind of a mindset into their
Mm.
organization.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And we may be able to table this just for a few minutes because I don't want to stray too far off the book because this is a leadership and a management book. But how many times have you seen salespeople treat their customers in a diminishing way? No, no, no. Let me just do that for you. No, 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 no. I'll take care of that. No, 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 no. No, we don't want you to, it's this, I don't want to make anybody uncomfortable. I don't want to challenge them in any way. I don't want to make them feel as if they're responsible in this agreement whatsoever. So I'm just going to do everything. I'm going to bend over backwards. And then they lose the customer
Mm.
because the customer doesn't feel validated. The customer doesn't feel trusted. The customer doesn't feel empowered to have any leverage in the relationship other than well, if you don't do it exactly how I want to, I'll take my
Mm.
business somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I've seen so many scared salespeople who just want to be liked.
Mm-hmm.
Let me make your plate for you at the
Yeah.
dinner buffet. Oh my God, come on. These are grown people. Don't infantilize me under the guise of I'm just trying to be really, really nice. I've seen that happen.
You've seen somebody actually make a plate for someone?
Yes.
Really? I think you have to, all right, we're going to go down this tangent because I'm drinking. And so, if you're listening and not watching, Jeff has, it looks like scotch or bourbon.
It's a nice bourbon whiskey. Yeah.
Nice bourbon. And I've got a nice Cabernet here. So, but I think you have to, doing something like that's so far over the top. And I'm a big believer in over the top service for clients.
Right.
But that's subservient in a way that doesn't serve. It doesn't put you on an equal playing field with your clients.
Nope.
And you have to be on an equal playing field. You're never going to be able to negotiate. You're never going to be able to have that balanced partnership if you are constantly in a role of subservientness, not service. Service is
right,
different, right?
Right, but
subservience, yeah.
But salespeople are not judged on the quality of their relationships. They're judged by the revenue that they generate. Now,
they are judged on the revenue that they can continue to generate.
Totally agreed.
Totally agreed. Generate that if you're gonna. Yeah.
But that's the part that we will argue about. I will take your side of the argument. However, there are salespeople out there who say, well, I'll just do whatever it takes to keep that money coming in. Anything you want. Oh, you want to go over here? Great. You want to go to dinner here? Sure. You want these concert tickets? Let me book these for you. You want me to and it's like, and we just last month we read Influence, and we talked about Robert Cialdini, and he talked about the law of reciprocity and indebtedness and all that stuff. But it's a very slippery slope between the law of reciprocity and quid pro quo. And when any of that relationship, when there is not balance in that relationship, when both partners in the relationship do not have leverage that is close to, if not equal,
it
gets out of whack really fast, and then it's easy to abuse.
Yeah, that's true. Now, I've taken clients out for really nice dinners before. I've done concert tickets. I've done ball games.
Do you go with them to the concert? Do you
Of
go
course.
with them to the Ah.
Of course.
Not everybody does.
Oh, I see. Okay. I got you.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Please, sir, may I have another? That kind of behavior is diminishing. It's done.
That kind of behavior actually is a red flag. As a leader in a sales organization, that kind of behavior would be a red flag for me, because I would be concerned about how far does this go, right? So if it is quid pro quo, then it's, at what point does it stop? Because in reality, the company has got to make a profit.
Yes.
And you can't support, and a lot of companies, you can't even, let's see if I can finish a sentence here. You can't even do that anymore
Yeah.
because
Oh yeah.
there is such a limitation on what gets construed as bribery or
Correct.
fraud or anything of that nature. So I guess I've worked in the security industry for so long.
Yep.
So we had to be uber careful about what we did and how what we did might be perceived, and you know.
There are some places where they don't have to be that comfortable or that
Okay,
careful.
sure.
I've seen it. I've advised against it. I've competed against it. I've done a lot of things. I've consulted with them. It's you do. There are a lot of situations. All politics are local. I get it. Everything gets signed off by someone who's willing to take responsibility for it. And oh no, this still makes sense. Okay, that's fine. And I see that kind of thing changing overall because there are laws being put in place, and just generally people are starting to recognize that that's not a great way to do business.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's still the temptation that if I can just pull out this amazing experience, or if I can do something that someone else won't do in order to get the business, then I can win the business. And
Mm.
people just think about doing something that someone else won't do. They don't think about whether or not it should be done and what that standard or the standard that is set when they go to that level. When you do not empower your customer, you're doing yourself a disservice. Sometimes empowering your customer means challenging them to do something that they haven't done before.
Mm.
There's that tension that we've talked about before, right?
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean doing everything for them because, oh, it's just really good customer service. Well, wait a second. If you do everything for them and take everything and take all the responsibility out of their hands, how are they responsible for, or when can they ever do anything without having their hand held?
Well, yeah, not only that, I mean, as a sales leader, I'm thinking like, all right, if you're doing all of this customer service, where's the next client coming from?
Well, there's that too, and that's the knock that farmers get in the hunter versus farmer debate. And I still contend that the best hunters find great places to farm.
That's right.
But
Yeah.
um,
But farming, that's not farming. What we're talking about isn't farming.
well, it's misconstrued as such.
Okay. But farming to me means something very different. Farming to me means cultivating the soil and making sure that the plants go to maturity, right? So there are so many things that come along with farming that have nothing to do with putting, shiny objects out
Yes,
in the fields. It's
but
just totally different.
you have a perspective far greater than that of the average salesperson. And
Well,
someone who isn't
right.
willing to dig deep enough is not going to see that. You've got
Yeah.
the experience to have seen that. You've seen both sides of that. It's if the customer has to have their hand held all the time, they're going to feel to a certain extent infantilized. And there's one thing to provide good service, but it's another thing to have that good service be reflected in showing the customer how they can help themselves.
Mm.
You mentioned parenthood a little while ago.
Yeah.
It would be way easier if my kids just did what they were told all the time. I'd sleep better. They would
You'd have great
be a lot
kids.
quieter. There'd be all kinds of stuff that would run more smoothly. Okay. However, I have to remind myself of this. I do not want to raise obedient adults. I want to raise little people who turn into big people, who think for themselves, who challenge long-held beliefs, who rethink those sacred cows, and really they question everything. Well, if they're going
Yeah.
to question everything, they need to start early. That means I got to answer some questions that I don't want to ask, or that I don't want to answer, that I definitely don't want them to ask. But at the end of the day, I know that those questions come from a good place and they deserve answers. And these little inquiring, inspired minds need to know the answers so that they can begin to inform themselves as they get older. I
Right.
want well-informed little ruckus makers as adults. That makes it harder for me And
Mhm.
that's the thing about this. When we go back to not being the shortest distance between 2 points, taking the long way around because it's the right way to go. It's easier for you to just do what the customer needs to do because you don't have to show them again for the 10th time.
Right.
Right. And it's easier just to take care of everything because, oh, that's just the way that we do it here. And you don't have to lift a finger. It's white glove service. And, there's a time and a place for white glove service. But there is a point by which you do too much. And instead of making yourself a linchpin that's indispensable, you really just kind of take yourself out of contention for that next bid because you've gone too far.
Well,
And
the moment that the opportunity goes to the next level,
yeah.
you're not going to be viewed as having the capability to go along with it. So as the client matures, you put yourself in a box. Yeah.
That's an excellent point. That's an
Yeah.
excellent point. You, yeah, you, it's not enough for you to just have leverage in the
Right.
relationship. Your customer needs to know that you have leverage in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Making yourself indispensable has to be recognized by all parties involved, not just you. You can't have your own vision of that. And I know people that will just take it to the customer service extreme and I bend over backwards all the time. And it's like, okay, when do you say no? Well, I don't ever say no. We're not allowed to say no. If we said no, then that would create some tension. I could
Mm-hmm.
ruffle some feathers. Like, okay,
Yep.
well, so you have no leverage. You've ceded all leverage and you're just totally hoping and praying that they don't take advantage of you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you say it like that, yeah, I know. And I see that a lot. I see that a lot.
Mm.
It's the wrong idea. And that's
Yeah.
not leadership. And
No, not at all. Well, they
yes.
kind of pull it back to the
To the
book.
book?
If you well, I think what we've just talked about happens oftentimes in management, in leadership,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is that that feeling of in the beginning it may come from a place of I want to help my staff, so I'm going to go and do this stuff because it's going to show them, it's going to model for them, right? To use like a traditional
Sure.
leadership development term, right? It's going to model for them what I want to have them do. And then they'll be able to pick it up themselves.
Right.
But in reality, what you do is you create these dependent individuals. And then once the I want to be nice and help serve them gets old for you, then you're just going to be in a place where I've got a bunch of employees who won't step up
Right.
and do what they need to do. And now I'm bitching about them. I'm ready to get rid of them.
Yep.
But there's, you started, you not realizing even that you created this.
Yep. And I need more resources. I need more manpower. I
Oh
need more
yeah.
budget. I need all those things. Well, wait, but you're not getting anything close to capacity out of the resources you're already using.
Yeah.
Yes, but I'm following this time-tested traditional model that's been proven to work. No, you're not. You're
Mm.
not that good at your job, and people don't want to lay down in traffic for you, and people don't feel like you make them better. They feel like you get in the way. The sales prevention department. How many times have you heard that? That moniker thrown around. Christy, you've been in leadership positions far beyond that of myself. I don't want to say how often do you see this because I get the impression that it's going to be a lot. But I mean, what is in the rarefied air you've occupied before? What's the pressure like? Is it? I mean, are you really rocking the boat to go about things this way? Do you find that is this a big cause of the Peter principle, right? I mean, you're
Mm.
promoted to your level
Yeah.
of incompetence and then you just kind of fired because you can't go any further. I mean, like why don't more people, why hasn't this, we've talked about the incentives and what people are measured on, but if this kind of philosophy is so powerful and impactful, why haven't more of those people made it to the top of more organizations?
Noise and time. So I think what I would say at the executive level, there is a lot of noise, and sometimes that noise comes from, depends on the leader, right? I mean, sometimes that noise comes from a big place, meaning that it's pressure filled all the time. Sometimes that noise comes from a benevolence on the surface, but hard underneath place, meaning that
Sure.
like you're getting all the kudos and the good word, but you know that underneath that your job's on the line, right? And I'll, honestly, I have to say that it was really challenging for me. I want to say this the right way, because I have worked for some amazing people, but it was
Sure.
really challenging for me to find a leader that understood how to bring out the best in people. And I'm not sure that I have actually been in an environment yet where that's been exceptionally modeled. There's one individual in my past who really exemplified that. And I don't think that he exemplified to his leadership what they wanted to see, right? So it was a disconnect. So the employees loved him and we felt multiplied by him, but the leadership didn't feel like they got what they needed out of him. And so I'm not sure outside of him that I have had a solid leader that exemplified what she describes in the Multipliers book. And here's the reality, right? I think it's really hard to do all of this. It's hard to always lead a debate. It's hard to always lead with questions. It's hard to actually always hand the pen back to the employees when you're up against a deadline, when you've got quota to meet and you've got clients that are upset. There are a lot of external pressures that are there. And if you haven't done the work before the pressure hits to really set the stage for the team to connect and be in this multiplier place, you're dead in the water. It's never going to happen. I mean, everybody's going to feel marginalized. Right. So I think it's just, there's a ton of noise and there's a lack of time.
And if you want something done right,
you can't do it yourself, though. I mean, that's the worst statement on the planet, right?
Oh, it's awful.
Something done right, do it yourself, right?
It's awful.
You can't. There's not enough time.
Nope.
Yeah. Nope. So I mean, you can't. I mean, if it's just you, maybe. But then you've got a whole other set of problems. But if you've got, I mean, if you're running a team and you're out there trying to do their work for them, no one's going to get ahead.
There's only so many things you can do first thing in the morning, Christy.
Yes, that's right. That's it. And I have to go to the gym because my brain doesn't work if I don't.
I can't go to the gym because my brain's too busy working. I'm on the opposite.
Well, there you go. Maybe there's a disconnect there I need to explore. Yeah, it's, this was really interesting for me. I liked the way that she laid everything out. And she's absolutely right, especially in these larger organizations. Like, so she comes from Oracle and Apple, and I mean, she's got some experience with massive scale organizations. And my experience has been more on the small to mid-size. So the pace is different. But I think that I have seen in larger organizations, I've worked for a couple of larger organizations, and I have seen that multiplier effect when the leader was several levels above me. And I would have really no direct understanding of how they managed, one-on-one, but I saw the effect or the waterfall effect that their leadership had.
Right.
And I think that's things like, those are people like Richard Branson, Mark Benioff. I mean, these are the people that are kind of the trendsetters that are establishing culture within their organizations.
It's funny you say that. The people who are celebrated are often, if not always, multipliers.
But
So
it's not just them. So I'm sorry, let me interrupt
go
you.
ahead. No, yeah, keep going.
Because it's not just them, it's them coupled with the multipliers that they put underneath them. So
Yep.
it's that web effect that makes the difference, because the individual almost always has a flaw.
So not every successful company is run by a multiplier at the top, because
Right.
sometimes you can just do it all, or at least enough of it yourself in order to be successful. However,
And you get lucky sometimes too.
except what now?
And you get lucky.
Yeah, sure. At the same time, how many multiplier leaders have not been successful?
Way more.
That have not been successful?
Have not been successful.
So okay, so then what you're saying is
Well,
the
what's
thesis of this
success?
book. Well, no, but what I mean is, well, profitability over the long term. I mean, like, listen, I mean, you go back to Jim Collins, Good to Great, level 5 leadership. Those are the ones who did it on every level. It was funny to hear about Circuit City, because when I was listening to it, that was currently, passing by the boarded up stuff. But that was after they made changes in leadership, and they made different decisions, and it led to their demise. But that's that level 5 leadership, doing the right thing for everybody involved.
But that's level 5 leadership at an organization on a massive scale, right? So
yes, but it's still the same concept of
I
this,
get it.
the thesis
Yeah.
of the book. So what I mean is, you don't have to be a multiplier manager, or you don't have to be a multiplier leader in order to be successful, but it is rare for you to be a multiplier style leader, I just coined that term, and not be successful.
I agree, but I think that you have I think it's success in certain places.
So
I
it's not
think
the same
that
kind of success.
I don't think it is.
Okay.
It can be. It absolutely can be. I mean, like I said, Benioff, Branson. I mean, you can look at a lot of those types of guys. My concern. Let's see. I'm just trying to make sure that I say this the right way. I think that in a small to mid-sized organization, a multiplier for multiplier's sake may not have enough of a runway to be successful.
So there's going to be a diminisher keeping them down.
That's exactly right. Well, because honestly, that's it. Your multipliers are outnumbered.
Yep.
Hands down, they're outnumbered. I think they're always the people we gravitate to, or people we want to work with. And it all depends on your definition of success, of whether or not they're successful. I would rather be a multiplier and make less money all day long.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's necessarily the case. I think that you do have the ability to multiply people and be successful financially as well. But I think that in a lot of cases, it's really hard to have the level of runway, the length of runway, time-wise, that you need to go into a new organization as a multiplier, change up the culture if you are surrounded by diminishers, and be considered successful. Let's look at politics. Jimmy Carter, probably one of the best multipliers on the planet and one of the worst presidents by almost anyone's standards,
Sure.
right?
Sure. He was president before I was born, Christy.
Oh, shush. I know, I've met Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter was an adjunct professor at Emory. So
okay.
Very, very impressive man.
Sure.
And a multiplier to the nth degree.
Right.
A successful man in all rights, but I don't think anyone would say that, especially at the time, that he was a successful president.
Right. The country didn't think so.
No.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
For certain.
And here's the thing. I mean, look at all of the different things that you have to be responsible for in that kind of role. So a multiplier, you have to, I think you have to choose. You have to decide, what is it that's most important to me? Am I a multiplier of people, which means that I'm going to make people, no matter what, people are going to be my first priority, and I'm going to focus on growing and building and pushing and stretching them, which I think is phenomenal, or I'm going to be a multiplier of profits and revenue, which a lot of your corporate leaders come in to do. Sometimes these things they're at polar opposites, they're polar ends, right? Or it's we'll get there, we can focus on those things when we get to the financial revenue or financial numbers that we need to get to.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like I'm being controversial here and a little bit cynical. I'm not, you know me, I'm not cynical, so.
No.
Yeah.
No, I think you're identifying and articulating what actually happens. And that's the interesting thing is, and that's kind of where I was going. So you picked it up perfectly. It was, you can be a success. Your company can be a success. You can succeed in your role by being a diminisher by definition. If you can just get what needs to get done. If you can get enough out of the people underneath you that you're managing, you can be a success. However, it's rare that with this kind of a mindset and skill set and the ability to develop the people beneath you and to get more out of them, not even just to develop them, but to get more out of them, you can accomplish more, but it takes longer. It's the longer route. It's the high road, so to speak. You're not always given that much runway.
Yeah.
And I when I switched companies, 10 years ago, I had an opportunity to do something different. And it meant not only doing something different than I had done before, but doing something differently than a lot of my colleagues were doing. And it was only because I was willing to take that risk that I was able to even go about implementing it. And I'll tell you what, if it didn't work right away, I might not be sitting where I am right now.
Yeah.
Because the shortcut didn't seem legitimate to me, right? That traditional straight line between 2 points, it didn't feel right to me.
Yeah.
So fortunately, some quick wins give you a little encouragement, a few more wins under your belt, something big comes along, and then all of a sudden people are starting to look at you differently. And, I had to be willing to take the risk, and anybody has to be willing to take that risk to stick their neck out a little bit. And that's part of being a multiplier. But then it's got to work. And if if I didn't get those quick wins, would my runway have been a lot shorter? Would that have prevented me from doing some of those things? Yeah, that's a risk that everybody needs to take if they're going to go this way. And sometimes that risk is a little too much for people. So you get people deterred from this kind of a mindset, from this kind of a mentality. And, and that's why not everybody's like this. Read the book, listen to what they're saying. You disagree with none of it. There's not a whole lot that you can disagree with.
No, not at all.
Yeah, people won't do it because they don't feel that they can, because the risk is too great.
So I think, what comes up for me in thinking about this book and the impact is that it comes back to a question that we ask all the time on the podcast, and that is, what is your why? What drives you?
It's one of the questions we ask of all of our guests.
I know,
as you
exactly.
Like to say.
And we ask of ourselves too. And I think you have to really get clear as a leader, as a sales professional, as a parent, as whatever you identify as. You have to get really clear on what is my priority. Is my priority to take the shortcut, get to the objective first, or is my priority to always lead with a multiplier effort?
Right.
If you take that approach, then you will actually develop a reputation as a multiplier, and people will start to recognize that given a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra support, that you can get way more accomplished in the long run, because that's what we're talking about, right?
It's
so
startling.
diminishers,
Yes.
It's like, if you want more, you add more people. You add more people, you add more people. It's the only way you get to more with a diminisher leader. With a multiplier leader, you can take the same number of people you got and start to spread it out wide, right? So if you want that long term and you're committed to that, no matter what, if that becomes the thing that's non-negotiable for you,
Mm-hmm.
then you develop a reputation, and then people will actually start to seek you out because they know that that's what you want. And you'll start to attract the kinds of organizations that have a multiplier culture, because it is very difficult to be a multiplier among diminishers.
So here's a question.
Mm-hmm.
Does it do you a service or a disservice as a manager to have your employees rave about how much they love to work for you?
I'm going to answer selfishly. It's always a service. I think there are leaders, there are executives that would look on that negatively.
That's what I mean. Like in terms of, okay, finding your next gig, right? You decide that you no longer are a fit for this company. You've done all you can do, let's say. Mm-hmm. You want to move on. There's a shop across town in a non-competitive situation. And, your 5 best salespeople raise their hand and say, I want to write you a recommendation letter because I loved working for you. Does that do you a service or a disservice? Or does it all just depend on the company you're looking for?
I think it depends on the leader you work for.
Mm.
I mean, just like anything else, I mean, everything that you read, it's not about the company. It's actually about the manager or the leader that you're working for.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that. I mean, I think it's the company certainly can have an impact, but I think that the individual you are going to be reporting into has a bigger impact there.
Okay.
For me, I don't care. I would rather, I decided a long time ago that servant leadership was my mantra,
mm-hmm.
no matter what. And so if that meant that there were things that had to be sacrificed in the short term, that's the direction I was going to take. And you also have to be willing to understand how that can become a saboteur moment, right? So you as a multiplier can't fall back on a crutch of, oh, well, I'm playing the long game. You also need to be able to perform short term. I'm not suggesting that you give up one for the other, right? But to say that like my employees love working for me, that's great. That doesn't say that I'm an easy manager.
Right.
I don't care about being an easy manager. I care about being an encouraging servant leader for you, not an easy manager. That's not the same thing.
Right. I agree. I don't know how much that means right now, but I agree.
Well, actually, it's perfect. I'm almost at the bottom of my wine glass. So
there you go.
Awesome.
There you go.
All right. So what would be, because we'll wrap this up. We've almost been on here an hour. So what would be a one takeaway for you in this book?
It's almost like I didn't know you were going to ask that, but I don't have an answer prepared.
Okay.
I think there was, it was an eye-opening book for me because while there's certainly a lot of confirmation bias involved, it opened my eyes particularly to the accidental diminishers. But in a way, this book gave me new language for concepts I already understood. I've worked for a lot of people. There have been some people that to this day, even though I haven't worked for them in years, I would lay down in traffic for. And there are some other people who I might buy a beer for if I saw them. And then there have been some other people.
Say I might be the traffic.
No. I don't have a malevolent bone in my body. But yeah, it gave me some more color, some more texture, some more context to why I would lay in traffic for some people.
Yeah.
And not for others. And I can tell you, I've got really good friends that I've worked for, and they've made me so angry. I've wanted to hit them in the past. And I know that I've made them so angry that they've wanted to hit me in the past. But that didn't turn sour, there was something that led to that feather ruffling, if you will, that was greater than the feather ruffling itself. So it made both of us in any of those situations, it made either of us think about that thing that, like, wait a second, this is out of character. There's something greater at work here. Let's look beyond the surface.
Yeah.
So it gave me more language. One takeaway, I think you need to look for the potential in people rather than the capability in people, and that so many people have so much more to offer than they're given credit for. And we did not dig into the millennial thing, but that came about, just kind of top of mind, 40 minutes ago or whatever. There's a lot of, there's a lot of, those people don't want to do this. And I refuse to believe anything that starts with those people.
Yeah.
But and I consult for a lot of companies where I interface with management and with the frontline salespeople. Mm-hmm. And there are always two very distinct sides to the same story. And the truth almost always lies in between.
Yeah.
And I think the multiplier looks for the truth rather than just telling, let alone believing a story.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what was interesting for me, because I listen to the audiobooks, and I usually get about 3/4 of the way through, and then I download a book summary before we do these. So you know my strategy. What was interesting for me, and I did love the fact that it gave me more language. The accidental diminisher I wish that were in the front, so I would have loved to have gone back and listened to that again. But the book summary that I printed out had at the very end, it said, if you try just one thing, and it gave two things to try. One was ask insightful and interesting questions that make people think.
Yep.
And then the other was internalize the belief that people are smart and will figure things out.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting for me is that I've been going through coaching certification and doing a whole host of training around my coaching practice. And the two of the cornerstones of my coaching practice is all about asking powerful questions and remembering that people are naturally creative, resourceful, and whole, meaning that the coach does not come to the session with all the answers. It's not about me coming in and imparting my knowledge. It's about me holding a safe place so that you can figure out the thing that you already know internally. You're just going to need a different perspective or maybe a different language around it. So that was kind of what was interesting for me, was just that little snippet showing up at the bottom of the book summary really kind of talked about why multipliers and why coaching appeals to me so. Mm-hmm. And this concept of servant leadership and the idea of being able to help people be more than they even believe they can be themselves. So it's I may actually have to go back and reread it. We'll see.
Oh man,
I know there's too many books on the list, man.
Too many.
Too many. All right. So speaking of books, what are we looking at next? Are we going to do Mike Weinberg, right?
Yeah, if you'll take the suggestion. I met Mike recently, not yet in person, but we've spoken on the phone a couple of times. We traded some messages, and New Sales Simplified is one of those books that's been talked about for a long time. I just saw it on a list as the number 2 most important sales book ever written. That's high praise. So far, he's earning it. I'm a little bit of the way into the book already. It's not a book that I put down easily, and that's not something that I can say about a lot of books. So Mike's been very generous to me. He will be a guest on this podcast. He's already committed to that, though we haven't set a date yet because he is a traveling man.
Yes, he is. He's very busy.
we will have him on the show very soon. And I think it's a good book to talk about because so far it addresses some things that every salesperson can identify with, whether they like to or not, and also provides some remedies for the way to go about making new sales. So
Mhm.
I love the way he writes. I love the way he talks. And he's someone that I think everybody can learn something from. So I think it's a good book to go
Okay.
with. Wasn't sure you were going to go that way. It was just my suggestion that I made earlier, but
I'm good with it.
all right, we'll do
I'm
it.
good.
We'll do
Yeah.
it. I love it. I love it when we pick books that I was already going to read, or that are even better when I've already read them.
Look, life is too short. You can't I mean, there are too many of them out there. So, and you know,
Too
it's
many
interesting.
books.
I purposefully, outside of the books that we read through the podcast, I stay away from sales books because
Oh,
I feel like I'm so immersed in the sales
yeah.
profession already. And after a while, everything just starts to get jumbled up. And I want to have my own view on some things.
Yep.
So yeah, I backpedal a little bit. So I figure one book a month's all right. I can do that.
And I tend to stay away from prescriptive sales books. I don't
Yeah,
want to
sure.
be told what to do.
Yeah.
I want to develop a deeper understanding of what selling is and what it isn't.
Mm.
And Mike's book is certainly prescriptive. It gives a blueprint. And I think to a certain extent, the way that I write probably should be more prescriptive, because it would be more helpful to more people if I can be more explicit. However, what I've always sought to do is deepen my understanding for the way people make decisions. And I think if you can
Mm.
understand how people work, you can
Mhm.
sell.
Yeah.
And so it's really kind of a long road approach, if you will, to figuring out how to do this. But I think if you can grasp the concepts and the principles, and you can adapt when the rules change, and they inevitably do. So pigeonholing yourself into one particular strategy is not something I like to do. So, I go back to that same list and I look through all 90 books or 55 books or whatever it was. And some of them were flat out blueprints. Here you go. This is how you do it. Okay, maybe that book helped a lot of people because it got in front of a lot of people and it was effective. I would argue that those are probably not books that are effective over the long term.
Yeah.
But when you look at Dale Carnegie and How to Win Friends and Influence People, and when you look at Jeffrey Gitomer and the Sales Bible, and when you look at Anthony Iannarino and Jeb Blunt, Sales EQ, and the Lost Art of Closing was on that list, and Fanatical Prospecting is on that list. Mike's books, New Sales Simplified and Sales Management Simplified, both on that book, because they talk about principles. They talk about the things you need to do. Go
Mhm.
do them how you need to do them. I'm not going to give you the words.
Right.
I'm just going to let you know what needs to happen here. And then it also opens up the opportunity to be coached through that kind of stuff. Well, what does this mean to me? Oh, I don't know. Let's sit down and let's talk about that.
Yeah.
And then you can develop a deeper understanding when it becomes more personal. Some people think that's getting sucked into rabbit holes and it's clickbait and funnels and things like that. I just think that anything that deepens my understanding of something that I'm so passionate about is valuable to me.
Yeah.
So this is one of those books, and that's why I'm looking forward to reading the rest of it.
Okay.
And
All
I'm
right.
actually reading this one. I'm not listening to it. I have a book typically on audible.com that I go through every month, and I'm in my spare time on the iPad, when I can't listen to it, when I'm in bed or whatever, that's when I typically pull the iPad out, where it's not always appropriate to have an audio kind of source on. That's when I go. And so I've got this one downloaded. I'm actually reading it, Christy. You'd be so proud of me.
I'm impressed. I'm going to do Audible. So
Okay, good for you.
just so you know.
You'll get done faster too. I think the last
Well,
book.
I don't know. Maybe.
Yeah,
You never
yeah,
know.
yeah.
All right. Well, good. Well, I think that's it for us. If you're listening, give us a comment, give us a review, go out on iTunes, give us a review on the podcast, and remember, when you know your why.
Your hows and your whats get much better.
I
Thanks,
love it.
everybody.
See ya.